Hello friends, welcome to Star Explainer. Tales of Herding Gods Part 351 and 352 explains based on novel. So let's start explanation. Qin Mu was full of smiles as he shoved his hand back inside the gate, shutting the gate of heaven influence. Celestial Venerable Yu is doing very well. I left him in Jade Capital Academy. Right now, he's following 35 human emperors, including first ancestor human emperor, in cultivating. He's pretty strong now. When I abdicate the position of human emperor, he will become the 38th human emperor. Elder Messenger of Death didn't intend to leave. Qin Mu pushed the gate closed with all his might, and finally managed to shut the gate of heaven influence. Following that, he willed the gate of heaven influence to disappear. Young master, the sea has turned black in color, Yang said as she looked downwards at the water. Qin Mu lowered his gaze. The sea water had really turned pitch black, and within the dark sea water, a paper boat floated beneath the surface. Elder Messenger of Death raised his lamp to shine at Qin Mu with bitterness. Watching the underwater sight, the dragon Qin felt a chill down his spine, and he hurriedly leaped into the air. Qin Mu was helpless. Celestial Venerable Yu, go to Jade Capital Academy and take a look for yourself, then you'll find out if what I said was true or false. You don't have to go through the trouble of following me. The Elder Messenger of Death beneath the surface of the sea gradually disappeared, his voice traveling faintly towards them. I will make a trip to Jade Capital Academy. If I find that it's not as you have said, I'll come and seek you out for a good chat. Only then did the darkness beneath Qin Mu's feet fade away. After just a short while, another Elder Messenger of Death arrived at Jade Capital Academy. There were differences between the world of the dead and the world of the living. Elder Messenger of Death wasn't willing to interfere with the world of the living and thus didn't show himself directly. Instead, he observed while hiding in the dark. He saw that the human emperors of the Hall of Human Emperors were training a little fatty. The smile on Elder Messenger of Death's face froze as he thought to himself, this little fatty is definitely not Celestial Venerable Yu. Lan Yutian, let's spar. The burly human emperor Qi Kang sealed his own divine treasures, and then started beating up the little fatty. After Qi Kang, it was Yishan's turn, and after Yishan, it was Lan Po's turn. Elder Messenger of Death's expression was completely dark, and he had the urge to annihilate the entire world. The only good part was that although the little fatty was beaten up quite badly, the human emperors didn't cross the line with their blows, so his life wasn't in danger. The human emperors surrounded and encircled Celestial Venerable Yu, who had already been beaten docile, telling him which move was bad and which move was wrong. The tradition of the Hall of Human Emperors is that if you don't fight, you won't become successful, and if you don't get a beating, you won't amount to anything. Our Hall of Human Emperors also has another tradition, which is, when you have gained achievements from your learning, you must beat your teacher up. You aren't allowed to learn from us. We never learn our master's skills, we all created our own techniques and divine arts. If you don't come up with your own techniques and divine arts, how will you ever defeat that little rascal of surname Qin? Upon hearing this, Elder Messenger of Death was relieved. He was a little unhappy with the way they were conducting their teachings, but the goal of their teachings was still very good. Qin Mu, Yang, and the dragon Qin followed the direction that Elder Messenger of Death had pointed out and continued on their journey. They traveled for more than a dozen days, but still hadn't found Dragon Count country. Other than waves and flying fishes in the sea, there was nothing else there. Entering the sea was like entering the barren desert, and it made them go crazy. The dragon Qin decided to float on the sea's surface again, and Qin Mu didn't have the strength to beat him anymore. Instead, he lifted the dragon Qilin's tail and walked on the surface of the sea, dragging this huge thing and continuing on their way. In the past days, Yang had been feeding on fishes and beasts of the sea, and she was soon tired of it. She stood on Qin Mu's shoulder with lifeless eyes, occasionally raising a claw to scratch at the corners of her mouth, picking out a fishbone. Qin Mu flipped open the geographical map that Bai Chua had drawn. He glanced at it and then immediately threw it into the sea. The geographical map that Bai Chua had drawn was the maritime geography from 40,000 years ago. With the changes in heaven and earth, the geography of the East Sea was no longer the same as what Bai Chua had seen back then. Furthermore, the primordial realm had been sealed once, and after breaking through the seal, the topography of the world had changed drastically. This was especially so for the sea. The shifts in the mountains at the bottom of the sea were even more difficult to detect. Many islands on the sea's surface had also vanished, and it was even tougher to determine the positions. Suddenly, Qin Mu tilted his head, speaking with a hoarse voice, "Sister Yanga, do you hear a singing voice?" Yanga replied weakly, "Young master, you must have misheard. Where is this singing voice?" There really is a singing voice." They followed the sound of the voice, and after a short distance, they saw an enormous skeleton on the sea's surface, with half of it sticking out of the surface. This was an unimaginable divine dragon skeleton. The sea was very deep, yet the divine dragon still had half of its skeleton sticking out of the sea's surface. One could imagine how colossal this dragon was when it was alive. The singing voice had traveled from the direction of this skeleton. Upon walking near it, Qin Mu and the other two saw that it was actually this dragon skeleton that was singing. The mouth of its dragon head opened and closed, and the song emerged from it. However, this divine dragon was only a skeleton now, so how was it that he was able to sing? The singing voice of the dragon skeleton was rough, lingering, and deep. It was like a poet of the sea, and its song was filled with depression and sorrow. "Young master, what is he singing about?" Yanga asked, since she didn't understand the dragon language. "He's using a very ancient dragon language to sing about his hometown." In the early years, Qin Mu had kept trying to decode the dragon language in the nest of the true dragon lord, so he was very well researched in the area of the dragon language. His hometown is Dragon Count country. Qin Mu continued to listen to the song of the dragon skeleton, and he said that Dragon Count country is a beautiful place. There, divine dragons frolicked on the surface of the sea, and there were many beautiful islands. The divine dragons built grand buildings on these islands and ruled the seas. The different races in the sea paid tributes to them, offering delicacies and fine jade and jewelry from the sea to them. The divine dragons lived in joy and harmony. Many divine dragons traveled to other towns and became the dragon kings, who could summon rainfall, and they were greatly respected by the people. Suddenly, the singing voice became depressed, carrying with it a murderous intent, and it also sounded like it was at a loss. He said that suddenly, one day, the feathered forest guards of the celestial heavens came and destroyed his hometown. The families of the divine dragons were torn apart, and were caught to become slaves, and they had chains pierced through their bodies. Many of the captives were beheaded, and the sea turned red with blood. Many slaves were taken in ships. Qin Mu listened to the singing of the dragon skeleton and continued, "The feathered forest guards of the celestial heavens used their flesh and blood as sacrifices to offer to celestial emperor of the celestial heavens to enjoy. Their king, King Dragon Count, was also captured and made a slave, and he was sent to the celestial heavens to be tried. His hometown was annihilated just like that, and he became a drifter with no hometown. When he missed home, he returned to the place that was in a state of desolation, and he saw the lonely spirits and wild ghosts who still lingered there. The dragon Qilin hid behind Qin Mu, looking out at the divine dragon skeleton timidly. Cult master, where is his hometown? And why did he die here? The dragon skeleton was long dead. It was its longing for its hometown that made it continue to sing this dragon race's song of homesickness, and so it couldn't answer them. This dragon count, could he be the same one that Chua met at the East Sea back then? Qin Mu thought for a while and then used the 10,000 spirit nature technique to enlighten the dragon skeleton. The dragon skeleton on the sea's surface suddenly trembled noisily, the water rose towards the sky, and the skeleton of the divine dragon ripped out of the sea. The dragon skeleton stood up and opened its mouth to roar, "Hometown! Hometown! I can't be buried in a foreign land. I want to return to my hometown dash." Qin Mu stood beneath him. The water surrounded him, but he was shielded by his vital qi. The youth raised his head and yelled loudly, "Where is your hometown?" Whoosh! The dragon skeleton suddenly leaped into the air, flying into the distance while moving its entire body. However, without its corporeal body and powers, it only flew for a short distance before it dropped out of the sky and smashed into the sea. The water splashed out, and the skeleton was also shattered into pieces, flying in all directions. Qin Mu used a spirit awakening magic power to awaken it. After, the skeleton of this divine dragon actually reconstructed itself, and very quickly, it was restored to its original state. The skeleton didn't fly this time, swimming in the sea instead, yet its speed was still very fast. "Keep up with it." Qin Mu leaped onto the dragon Chilean's head, and the dragon Chilean hurriedly followed after the skeleton. The dragon skeleton swam faster and faster, barging forwards along the sea surface. Suddenly, the dragon skeleton vanished right before their eyes. Qin Mu was stunned, and the dragon Chilean rushed over and quietly stuck out a claw to check it out. His claw reached into the space in front and disappeared as well. It's a smokescreen created by a formation. Qin Mu walked into it. The sea before his eyes suddenly retreated, and a sight of magnificent scale rushed towards him. There were countless gods who had captured the dragon counts with dragon heads and human bodies, and were beheading them with their sacrificial knives. Countless heads rolled off, and fresh blood transformed into a vast ocean. The waves of blood flew upwards and rushed into the air. In the air was an enormous sacrificial altar. Blood surged around the altar. It was a sacrificial offering of a massive scale. The god and devil generals of the feathered forest guards yelled out orders continuously. The citizens of Dragon Count Country became the offerings of this sacrifice, their flesh and blood offered to the celestial heavens as sacrificial offerings to become the delicacies of Celestial Emperor, and the civil and military officials of the celestial heavens. Qin Mu was in a daze, and he shook his head. Suddenly, the illusion before his eyes vanished, and reality appeared before him. The sacrificial site previously was merely a flashback of history. It was the scene during the Dragon Han era, where Wei Suifeng had led the feathered forest guards to quell the rebellion in Dragon Count Country, and had massacred the citizens of Dragon Count Country to offer to the celestial heavens. What was before him right now was the true reality. In front of him, countless enormous dragon skeletons lay scattered across a vast land. There were skeletons everywhere, and within the collapsed grand dragon palaces, there were phantom flames that rolled up the white bones, making these skeletons of the dragon counts stand up and walk around. This place resembled the netherworld. In the air, there were dragon skeletons with phantom flames in their eye sockets that were swimming about. Within the vast city, the markets were still bustling with activity, the dragon skeletons roaming the streets. Qin Mu even saw the real ghost market. Those dragon counts were still buying and selling things within the dragon city, as well as bartering goods. It was as though they were still alive. He could even hear the sounds of bargaining. Qin Mu brought the dragon Chilean and Yanga into the city of Dragon Count Country. Compared to the gigantic divine dragons, the dragon Chilean was like a tiny fellow. Even if he returned to his true form, he would still be considered short here. The divine dragons of history had built a glorious civilization and a great country here. Qin Mu situated himself amongst the walking white-boned giants and watched as they seemingly continued to live their carefree lives. However, this sight felt inexplicably weird. Qin Mu then saw the dragon skeleton that had previously led them to Dragon Count country. It transformed into a dragon-headed and human-bodied Dragon Count, as though he was reborn, and flew about in the air. In Qin Mu's eyes, all he saw were heaps of white bones. Yet, in its eyes, Dragon Count country wasn't a ruin, but a place that was filled with life, and the other Dragon Counts were all still alive. The Dragon Count excitedly greeted the moving skeletons. It didn't realize that it was already dead, and that its clansmen were also already dead. Everything here was merely a product of the Dragon Count, who had died wrongfully. It had forgotten that it was already dead, and in its confusion and ignorance, it repeatedly did the things that it had done before it died. However, this Dragon Count, that had finally returned to its hometown, had released its attachment now and attained peace in death. Cult Master, are they not aware that they are already dead? The Dragon Qin asked in an alarmed tone. Before Qin Mu could reply to him, suddenly, all the divine dragons in Dragon Count country seemed to have heard what he said, and they all turned to look towards the Dragon Qin in unison. The Dragon Qin was startled, and he hurriedly hid behind Qin Mu again, clamping his tail tightly and trembling in fear. Hua! It was as though the roar of a tsunami had swept towards them. In a split second, within the Dragon Count country that was only just bustling with activity, all the skeletons collapsed and disintegrated. Countless bones fell to the ground, the phantom flames within their eyes extinguished, and there was no longer a single standing Dragon Count. They had initially not realized that they were already dead, yet now that they had been made aware of this by the Dragon Qilin's words, in an instant, these souls lost the ability to control the skeletons. The entire Dragon Count country suddenly fell dead in this instant. When the sounds of the white bones collapsing stopped, the surroundings were filled with a deathly silence, and no other noise could be heard. The skies gradually turned dark. A faint sighing sound could be heard, and phantom flames emerged, floating in the air. Countless paper boats sailed towards them from Yudu with the messengers of death standing at the heads of the boats. Qin Mu paid his respects, and the messengers of death too returned their respects. The Dragon Counts here have already been dead for almost 1,000,000 years. They didn't know that they were already dead, and thus their souls lingered on and were reluctant to leave. One of the messengers of death explained to Qin Mu, previously, their will to live was too strong, so I was unable to enter this place to guide their souls. However, now that they have realized that they are already dead, I can come in to guide them to Yudu. Qin Mu looked around him. Most of the skeletons had their heads chopped off, their dragon heads all over the ground. He couldn't help but frown, asking in a hoarse voice, "Celestial Venerable Yu, the Commander Wei Suifeng of the Feathered Forest Guards of the Dragon Han Celestial Heavens back then, he is my big senior brother. Was he really so brutal? Did he really have to annihilate the whole Dragon Count race and country? Wei Suifeng wasn't the brutal one." Elder Messenger of Death continued, "The brutal one was the whole of the Dragon Han Celestial Heavens." Qin Mu was stunned. Using a rebel race or country, and offering it to the Celestial Heavens and Celestial Emperor as a sacrifice. In the Dragon Han era, it was a very common thing. Elder Messenger of Death continued, "The Feathered Forest Guards quelled the rebellion and defeated Dragon Count country. They annihilated the country and the whole race, sacrificing it towards Celestial Emperor, letting the Celestial Emperor enjoy a feast of flesh and blood. This was all only normal in that era. Your big senior brother was only just following the customs of the time. He couldn't change anything. If he changed, he would be considered the odd one out. In the whole Dragon Han era, these things happened frequently. Why did Celestial Emperor have to die? Why did the Heaven Alliance have to eliminate him at all costs? This is the reason." Qin Mu's hairs stood on their ends. Ancient Celestial Emperor hadn't died a wrongful death. Your time spent in the Dragon Han Celestial Heavens was too short. You only stayed there for a short period, so you aren't at all aware of the darkness of the Dragon Han era. Elder Messenger of Death's face was hidden in the dim shadows, making it impossible for one to see his face clearly. He continued to speak without a trace of emotion in his voice. In the era of the ancient Celestial Emperor, countless races of the life forms after the beginning of the world were exterminated. Even the half-god races weren't spared from this threat. At the Jade Pool, what you saw was merely the most glamorous side of that era. Regarding the ugly side of the era, you know nothing of it. Qin Mu was silent for a while. How ugly was it? Elder Messenger of Death suddenly reached a finger out and touched Qin Mu's forehead with it. The scene before Qin Mu's eyes instantly transformed as he entered Elder Messenger of Death's memory. He reached an era that seemed to be a barbaric one. The people wore beast skins or straw skirts, and their clothes were ragged and ruined. Yet, in the distance, there was an enormous shrine that was glorious and incomparably extravagant looking. Before this shrine was a towering sacrificial altar. Those people, who were neither well-dressed nor well-fed, had given their best food to feed the best-looking virgin males and virgin females, and then they had offered them on the sacrificial altar to pray for good weather. Rays of light flashed past above the sacrificial altar, and the apparitions of Celestial Emperor and the Celestial Heavens God Kings appeared, taking these virgins with them to feast and enjoy. Qin Mu then saw a different scene, one of a race that didn't sacrifice meat to Celestial Emperor and the Celestial Heavens God Kings. These clansmen were captured by imposing-looking gods and escorted to the sacrificial altar to be beheaded and sacrificed so as to appease the rage of the heavens. Beneath the sacrificial altar were countless corpses and skeletons that piled up like a mountain. Elder Messenger of Death then showed Qin Mu another memory of his. This memory was one about the slaves from different races who were mining in the primordial realm. Those divine arts practitioners had chains piercing through their bodies, and pus flowed out of them. They were barefoot as they walked into the seemingly bottomless mine to extract, or under the brilliant lights radiating from the divine metal. The ones who were guarding these divine arts practitioner slaves were the gods of the Heaven Han Celestial Heavens. The sharp glare of the divine metal made the skin of these divine arts practitioners fester endlessly, and their souls felt like they were being sliced at every moment. This was almost similar to the great torture of death by 1,000 cuts. Elder Messenger of Death's memory transformed yet again, and he brought Qin Mu into another memory of his. This one was of the war between the different races in the heavens. Before the war started, the chiefs would order a sacrifice, by executing the common people, and slaves to offer to the gods of the celestial heavens to pray for the help of these gods in the war. Countless corpses collapsed before the front lines, and a blood-red glow rushed up into the heavens. When the war broke out, the gods and devils of the celestial heavens came down to the mortal world to enjoy their sacrificial offerings. These ancient gods mercilessly slaughtered the opposite army on the battlefield. However, they didn't lay a hand on the other ancient gods who had similarly come from the heavens. They merely killed those of the opposing army, and whoever exterminated the opposing army first would be the one who won. To the ancient gods of the celestial heavens, the wars of the mortal world were merely games that were insignificant to them and would instead allow them to enjoy the sacrificial offerings of blood. Yet, to the races of the mortal world, war was a fight for survival. For every battle, the people had no choice but to offer sacrifices to the celestial heavens. This was because if they didn't do so, they would definitely end up being exterminated. Qin Mu's body trembled as he broke free from Elder Messenger of Death's memories. He gasped for air with great effort, resembling one who had almost drowned and was now catching his breath on land. In such a horrifying era, the founding master, Wei Suifeng, truly could only follow the local customs. Elder Messenger of Death said, "The scenes that I witnessed are merely the tip of the iceberg. What I couldn't see was even more. These were daily occurrences of the Dragon Han era. This kind of Dragon Han Celestial Heavens, this kind of ancient god celestial emperor, regardless if one was of the half-gods, or the races of life forms after the beginning, they all wanted nothing more than to annihilate it all. Qin Mu composed himself. When he had time traveled to the first year of Dragon Han, he hadn't stayed for long. Back then, it was during the Jade Pool meeting. The celestial heavens had gathered the leaders of the various races and the ancient gods, and it was an extraordinarily exciting event. What he had witnessed was truly the most prosperous and flourishing side of that era. He hadn't gone to the lower bound and thus didn't get to see the lives of the citizens in the different worlds of the various heavens. As such, he wasn't very averse towards the ancient celestial emperor, and when he felt he could join forces with the ancient celestial emperor, he had proactively contacted celestial emperor through Yangqiling so as to form an alliance. It was only now that he realized that he was still somewhat naive in his thinking. Although he was the one who had suggested the formation of the Heaven Alliance, and was also a founding elder of the Heaven Alliance, he didn't understand why Celestial Venerable Yun and the Heaven Alliance would join forces with the Dragon Heaven Celestial Heavens founded by Celestial Venerable Hao. He didn't understand why they would put aside their grudges of life and death and plan to get rid of the ancient celestial emperor together. In hindsight, the celestial heavens formed by the ancient celestial emperor was savage and cruel beyond measure. It made the tens of thousands of races in the world fall into a state of great fear, all of them fearful that their race could be annihilated anytime. The Dragon Heaven Celestial Heavens and Heaven Han Celestial Heavens were also both pawns that he had used to maintain his position of power. He let the two smaller celestial heavens control the lower bound for him and make sacrificial offerings to the high and mighty Dragon Han Celestial Heavens. He also let them fight each other so as to prevent either one from becoming too powerful. At that time, the conflict between the half-gods and the different races wasn't the most important. The conflict with the Dragon Han Celestial Heavens was of the utmost importance. Thus, Heaven Han Celestial Heavens and Dragon Heaven Celestial Heavens had to join forces, and all of the races, regardless of whether they were half-gods or life forms after the beginning, also had to join forces. They had to get rid of the ancient celestial emperor. This world wasn't only split into black or white. At present, the Heaven Alliance seemed to have changed, replacing the ancient gods to become the rulers of the corrupted celestial heavens. However, back then, there were still righteous and ambitious people within the Heaven Alliance who were fighting hard for the right to live for the various races. It was only after the Heaven Alliance had gotten rid of the ancient celestial emperor that there were the future generations of the Crimson Light era, High Emperor era, Founding Emperor era, and the Eternal Peace era of today. If the ancient celestial emperor had continued to be in power, the whole universe, the tens of thousands of worlds and heavens, would eternally be stuck in that savage era, and would never be able to evolve. Although the Heaven Alliance became corrupted in the future, in the early stages, they did a great deed that had impacted all of the races, including the half-gods. Eliminating the ancient celestial emperor was a deed of immeasurable merit. Then, my alliance with celestial emperor, was it right or wrong? Qin Mu muttered. In the ruins of Dragon Count Country, the countless messengers of death took their paper boats and flew about soundlessly, guiding the citizens of Dragon Count Country to board the paper boats. Some of the Dragon Counts weren't willing to board the boats, and they flew around the skies to avoid capture. The messengers of death then raised their lamps, shining the lights onto the faces of these Dragon Count souls. The Dragon Count souls lost their consciousness upon being shone upon, and they foggily queued up to board the boats involuntarily. The boats that were full of Dragon Counts sailed into Yudu, and vanished from sight. Very soon, the place quieted down, and there was deathly silence. However, if I didn't make an alliance with Celestial Emperor, eternal peace would be in danger. Eternal peace wouldn't even be able to survive Mother Earth. Qin Mu retracted his gaze, feeling lost. He paced back and forth around this skeleton-covered dragon city aimlessly. The dragon Qin understandingly left him to be by himself. Celestial Emperor deserved death. However, if I hadn't joined forces with Celestial Emperor, eternal peace wouldn't have been able to last for long. Joining forces with Celestial Emperor, if he manages to revive and reclaim his corporeal body, we will definitely return to that savage era. Celestial Emperor can be made use of, he can be used to delay time. However, Celestial Emperor must not be revived. He cannot be revived. Let him continue to be half dead as he is now. Qin Mu calmed down and started to search around the area for traces that his big senior brother Wei Suifeng could have left behind. Wei Suifeng did things meticulously, so if he left something behind in the ruins of End for Qin Mu, he would definitely have considered the possibility that in the future, Qin Mu might not find the ruins of End. Thus, he definitely would have left some clues behind. However, Dragon Count country had already become a wasteland, and it was extremely huge. It was almost as vast as Eternal Peace, and it was a ruin. It would take an inestimable amount of time, if he wanted to find the clues left behind by Wei Suifeng. Qin Mu continued to walk. Suddenly, he turned around and laid down on his back, his hands folded behind his head as he laid among the dragon skeletons and stared at the sky in a daze. After a short while, he slowly closed his eyes and drifted into sleep. The dragon Qin snickered. Sister Yanga, cult master, has times when he slacks off too. As he was speaking, he saw a mini Qin Mu crawling out from between strands of Qin Mu's hair. The mini Qin Mu stuck out his head to look about his surroundings, as he made some mumble-jumble noises. The dragon Qin was startled and was about to speak again, when he saw more mini Qin Mus crawling out from Qin Mu's hair. They stretched their bodies, moving their limbs about and mumbling in a language that no one could comprehend. It sounded like incoherent sleep talk. After, from Qin Mu's mouth, nostrils, and ears, mini Qin Mus emerged as well, growing in number. They ran about in all directions and spoke in an incomprehensible language. Very soon, the dragon Qin had no place to stand, and he quickly floated in the air. Some of these dainty little Qin Mus flew with the wind, some tunneled underground, and there were also some who mumbled a string of words to the skeletons of the dragon counts. Following this, the skeletons noisily stood up one by one. Those mini Qin Mus stood on the heads, dragon horns, and in the eye sockets of these dragon count skeletons. They were in high spirits as they waved their hands and cried out, Maha Dash. The dragon Qin understood this line. After all, he still had half of the bloodline of the dragon race. This Maha could mean excitement, or to start moving. It could be comprehended in different ways. The mini Qin Mus rode on the skeletons of the dragon counts, and ran about in a disorderly manner. They flew into the air, tunneled into the ruins, and ran into the seas, searching through heaven and earth. It was a busy affair. Maha, Maha. When the mini Qin Mus bumped into each other, they would also interact with one another with solemn expressions. The dragon Qin and Yanga watched this sight in a daze. The mini Qin Mus emerging from Qin Mu's head grew exponentially in number, and very soon, the desolate dragon count country became extremely lively. Countless mini Qin Mus very seriously searched the place thoroughly, flipping the whole dragon count country on its back. I have heard of this technique. It seems to be the Emperor's throne true scriptures of Brahma Buddha from the Buddha realm. Yanga transformed into her human form, and lifted up a mini Qin Mu. This mini Qin Mu sprinted across her palm, and onto her body, running around randomly. Goddess mentioned before that this technique requires one to be asleep to cultivate it. It's very mysterious. Yanga was tickled by the mini Qin Mu crawling about on her body, and she couldn't help but giggle out loud. Stop crawling about, it's ticklish. Come out quickly, you can't crawl there. She intended to grab the mini Qin Mu when he suddenly ran onto her head and grabbed one of her plume feathers. He solemnly pointed to the front and cried out, Maha dash. Yanga couldn't help herself, as she grew out her wings and flew into the sky, following the command of this little fellow and flying in the direction that he had pointed. Another one of the dainty Qin Mus leaped onto the dragon Chilene's head, crying Maha, Maha, as he directed the dragon Chilene to fly. The sky, the land, and the sea were all filled with these tiny fellows. Their three eyes all shone brilliantly, making use of their god eyes to search for the clues left behind by Wei Suifeng. Suddenly, all of the Qin Mu sprinted back, returning to the dragon city with great speed. Then, they all tunneled into the heart of Qin Mu's brows and disappeared. Qin Mu yawned, stretching out his body and lazy back, and then laughed. I've finally found it. Qin Mu did not know how he managed to execute Brahma Buddha's boundless Calamity Sutra either. He just felt that he had the technique in his head, and then at the same time, he wanted to take a nap. He had then unconsciously executed the boundless Calamity Sutra when he entered his dreams. In his dreams, he dreamed of a world of bubbles. This world opened up in his dreams. The bubbles continued to grow and then gradually merged with the ruins of Dragon Count Country. Within this world of bubbles, countless selves had grew out like weeds and ran about in all directions. It was a peculiar dream. Every self within the dream seemed to be an independent being of its own, yet they were all connected to his vision, and his sleep talk in his dreams had also become the language spoken by these mini Qin Mus. The words spoken while dreaming were incomprehensible. Even the identical mini Qin Mus found it difficult to understand what either of them were saying. Eventually, he decided to use the simplest language to let these mini-selves to interact with each other. Thus, the Mahas of the dragons became the language of communication amongst them. It was a rowdy scene within his dream. In this dream, Qin Mu had turned Dragon Count Country upside down, and finally found the clues left behind by the founding master. Only then did he wake up from his dream, taking a big yawn and stretching his lazy back. The world of bubbles collapsed and was obliterated. As he woke up, it was as though a world was being annihilated, and all the mini-selves within that world also disappeared completely. Brahma Buddha's boundless Calamity Sutra had unimaginable uses. This dream world was merely one of its many marvelous uses. There were still many other mystical cultivation techniques. It was just that Qin Mu did not actually understand how to cultivate this technique, or how to execute it. Everything seemed to just come to him naturally. He put aside his doubts about the boundless Calamity Sutra, and walked to that area of ruins that he had discovered. Dragon Chilene and Yanga followed him there, and they saw that Qin Mu was standing on a star-gazing platform of Dragon Count Country. The armillary sphere, and other divine weapons on the star-gazing platform, were already shattered, and it was a complete mess. Qin Mu lowered his head to inspect the star markings on the ground. Immediately after, he took out his calculation spirit weapons and begun to calculate nosily. Yanga was not skilled in algebra, and even after staring at what he was doing for a long period, she could not understand it, and she questioned, "Young master, what are you calculating?" Dragon Chilene replied, "This is a puzzle left behind by the founding master of the Heavenly Saint cult. Every time, this big senior brother will use algebra to come up with a problem for cult master to solve. After solving the problem, then we would be able to obtain the clue he left. They always communicate in the language of algebra." Yanga was astonished. Algebra is also a language. To masters of algebra, it is a language. Dragon Chilene continued, "Others often say that the Tao sect is the number one sect in algebra. However, they have overlooked us Heavenly Saint cult. Back then, I had followed Patriarch in researching algebra extensively, and I have some attainments in it. The teleportation divine art, teleportation formation, stars formation, and technique of creation of Heavenly Saint cult are born of the research in algebra. Further, founding master is an expert in algebra, and Saint Woodcutter is a grandmaster of algebra. Even his mount, senior brother senior tiger, is also skilled in algebra. If they are ranked in the Tao sect, they can still be considered top experts there. Yang rewarded him with a spirit pill, praising him. Fatty Dragon is really knowledgeable. Qin Mu solved the problem that the founding master had left behind, and he paced the stargazing platform, muttering to himself. What he left behind was the data for a dimension. But for dimensions, it requires for there to be a center point to know where this dimension is. If I use the star-gazing platform as the center to determine the dimension. His expression was odd, and suddenly several hands grew out from under his armpits and started to calculate animatedly. This dimension does not exist in the same space as the primordial realm. Qin Mu's expression gradually became weirder, following the dimension data that Wei Suifeng had left behind. Ruins of Ens was really not in the primordial realm, it was part of another world. This sort of dimension architecture was like Yudu to the primordial realm. Yuanju overlapped with the primordial realm, and with all the other tens of thousands of worlds and heavens. However, they did not exist in the same dimension. Ruins of Ens was like that too. It is very difficult to enter this dimension if I solely rely on the teleportation divine art. Qin Mu immediately imprinted runes onto the star-gazing platform to enter the dimension that Wei Suifeng had marked. Only through the use of a teleportation formation of a huge star would it be possible. Dragon Qin too followed and helped. After 2 days, they finally crafted out the architecture of the teleportation formation. Yana transformed into a green sparrow and perched on Qin Mu's shoulder. Dragon Qin too came to the center of the platform. Qin Mu activated the formation. The teleportation light rays shot through the skies. When the rays finally receded, they vanished from Dragon Count country. When Qin Mu was finally on solid ground, they saw that it was incredibly dull around them. There was a low-lying planet in the sky. There were numerous big holes in it, and near the damaged parts of the planet there were also many broken pieces scattered around it, hanging tranquilly up in the sky. Beneath their feet was a pitch-black ring-shaped mountain range. Beside them there were magnificent-looking palaces, and surrounding the mountain range was a boundless dark sea. And in the center of this ring-shaped mountain range, there was a bottomless abyss. The ring-shaped mountain range was extremely large, and its circumference was almost immeasurable. Even if one was to move all 20 heavens of Mount Meru over, it would still not be able to fill up that abyss in its center. This abyss is the abyss of the ruins of Ens. The celestial river starts flowing from the celestial heavens and ends in the ruins of Ens. However, Qin Mu did not see the celestial river flowing to this area. He looked towards the skies, and could indistinctly see that there was a river stream left behind by the celestial river in the skies above. The river stream was a space remnant that had been imprinted by the weight of the celestial river. Yet, the celestial river had been cut off. At the end of the High Emperor era, Celestial Venerable Ling had executed her divine art in the High Emperor Celestial Heavens of Yuanju, intercepting the celestial river, and had replaced the substance within the celestial river with herself. She had demonstrated a world-shaking divine art that could pass through past, present and the future. From then on, the celestial river stopped flowing towards the ruins of Ens, instead flowing into the East Sea. When the primordial realm was sealed, the celestial river then became the surging river. The celestial river was cut off and no longer poured into ruins of Ens. The shattered planet in the sky should have been the star that had revolved around the celestial river back then, yet due to a great battle, the planet had been rather badly shattered. Qin Mu and the others stood before the side palace of the ruins of Ens, and looked towards the center of the ruins of Ens. They instantly felt dizzy and dazzled, and there was a feeling as though their souls were about to be sucked into this abyss. They then hurriedly retracted their gaze. Big Senior Brother's geographical map, it is this place. Qin Mu retrieved a scroll of geographical map from his Daotai sack. Spreading it out and flattening it, he inspected it closely. Back then, in the Valley of Stars outside the Parameter Arc, among the geographical maps Wei Suifeng had drawn with star sand, one of them was the ruins of Ens geographical map. 20,000 years ago, he had came to the ruins of Ens to search for ancient secrets, wanting to achieve the establishment of 3 things to become a saint. Here, he had witnessed an unbelievable event of the celestial river flowing back. The celestial river had already been cut off, yet when he came here the celestial river actually re-emerged. The river stream in the skies, that had dried up, was now filled with the majestic celestial river that surged downwards from the skies and poured into the ruins of Ens. What was bizarre was that a fog had surged forwards from the celestial river and swept Wei Suifeng into it. He met Celestial Venerable Ling within the fog, and by the time he emerged from the fog, he had traveled back to the Dragon Han era and became a member of that great era, even becoming the commander of the feathered forest guards of the Dragon Han celestial heavens and controlling the most formidable great army of gods and devils under the celestial emperor. Qin Mu inspected the geographical map closely. On the ghost ship, Wei Suifeng had a letter. The letter had also contained a geographical map of the ruins of Ens. However, it was different from the one that Qin Mu had. It was obvious that they were drawn in different periods. However, on the whole, the ruins of Ens did not change. The thing that big senior brother had left behind is hidden in the ruins of Ens. Qin Mu had an odd expression on his face. He looked at the map and then at the abyss, his head feeling a little dizzy. The location that was marked on the map where Wei Suifeng had hid the item was the abyss. Can the abyss be entered? He was a little doubtful. The abyss was able to swallow even the celestial river, and it was also extremely strange. It seemed to be capable of swallowing souls. If one was even a little careless, they might die miserably. Dragon Qilin picked a giant stone and threw it into the abyss. The stone fell in and vanished in the darkness. Even after a long time, there was still no sound of it hitting the ground. Could it be that we have to jump in? Qin Mu frowned. He used the heavenly devil creation technique to seal his 3 souls and 7 spirits, suppressing them within his body. This way, it would not be possible for the abyss to pull out his soul. When he was about to jump into the abyss, suddenly there was a meteor shower pouring from the skies. Numerous huge stones descended from above. It was a badly damaged planet that had orbited into the skies above the abyss of the ruins of Ens, and was captured by force of attraction of the abyss, resulting in the shattered pieces of the planet furiously falling into it. The pieces of the planets, that was the size of mountains, drew rays of fiery light across the sky, gaining speed and falling into the abyss, disappearing one by one. In the sky, even though the planet was already damaged, it was still extremely gigantic. In this moment this planet was actually captured by the abyss. As well, it shifted slightly in the sky yet failed to escape the force of attraction of the abyss. It too was dragged down towards the abyss. In the shift, the damaged planet ruptured ceaselessly from the compression. The surface of the planet was also set ablaze. The tens of thousands of volcanoes on it spewed out, and very soon its surface completely transformed into a magma sea of flames. Following this, the planet was tugged apart by a terrifying force, and it was like the long noodles that the eternal peace chefs would pull with force. It became thinner and thinner, longer and longer. As Qin Mu and the group watched on in fear, the planet was pulled into a beam of flames and it sunk into the abyss. In the depths of the abyss, the flaming glow shone brilliantly for a while and then gradually, the light dulled down. Qin Mu wiped off the cold sweat on his forehead and his voice was hoarse. "Fatty dragon, we can leave this place through the river stream of the celestial river." Before he could finish speaking, suddenly there was a gradual glow of flames lighting up from the depths of the abyss, and it was becoming brighter. Qin Mu was stunned. The light grew brighter and brighter, and suddenly, a world-breaking, earth-shattering loud noise could be heard and the abyss of the ruins of Ens erupted. The undercurrent of the ruins of End exploded. Qin Mu's heart jolted. The whole abyss of the ruins of End suddenly had a current that was spewing upwards and outwards. It was surging outwards at a shocking speed, and the force of the current was so powerful that it directly shattered the skies. Prior, they had saw a bright light within the ruins of Ens. However, the current that had spewed out from the abyss was a pitch black in color, and did not have any light. This abyss of the ruins of Ens was like an extremely humongous mouth of a monster that had burped after eating a planet. There was no color in the sky, it was originally already very dim, and now it was almost dark as night. The seawater beyond the ruins of Ens had also become blacker, and the sky seemed to have disintegrated from the impact of the currents of the ruins of Ens, as a shower of ashes started to float slowly in the air. The flotchy of black were like marks left behind from the sky being burned into ashes. They disintegrated instantly once it landed in the hand and vanished like smoke in thin air. These are not the ashes of the sky, they are the ashes of the planet from just now. Qin Mu raised his head, looking at the spewing dark current. He almost scolded out, "This damn place, it's not a place for humans to come to. The abyss of the ruins of Ens can easily purge a planet. Who can enter it? Big senior brother, you are too good at hiding things." At this moment, the spewing undercurrent gradually slowed down. A bright light rose higher and higher from the center of the ruins of Ens. It was the light that they had saw before the current spewed out. Qin Mu was stunned for a while. The darkness seemed to have stood still in the sky, resembling a dark celestial river that was flowing extremely slowly. Within the undercurrent, the light came closer towards them. Finally, the light appeared before them. It was a stalk of flower, an incomparably enormous flower. It was a single stalk, but on it grew two flowers. It resembled two lotuses that grew together from the same base, one on the left and one on the right. One of the flowers was vermilion red in color, while the other was a dull black. The black flower was almost completely camouflaged against the black flow of darkness. Qin Mu's heart jolted slightly and he suddenly burst out laughing. So this is how it is. Big senior brother is ingenious. Now that the ruins of Ens is calmed, there is no more force of attraction, so one can enter the flower and through it, enter the abyss and obtain the thing that he had left behind. Cult Master, are you certain you want to go in there? Dragon Chilene's heart was thumping with fear. Qin Mu had already stepped into the dark celestial river and flew towards the two giant flowers. Yang perched on his shoulder and turned around to yell, "Fatty dragon, hurry up." Dragon Chilene did not want to go in. However, he looked at the surroundings and observed that it was extremely dim, and there were faint shrill cries coming towards them. He could not tell if it was the sound of the darkness pouring through the ruins of Ens rubbing against space, or if there was really some monster that had been spewed out. With that, he could only hurriedly dash into the dark celestial river, following behind Qin Mu. Cult Master, what if these two flowers retreated back into the abyss? Wouldn't we end up being trapped till death in there? He asked in a hushed tone. At this very moment, the two giant flowers trembled gently and the dark celestial river started to reverse its flow. Qin Mu shot him a fierce glare, and increased his speed to dash towards the two giant flowers. Fatty dragon, were you a crow in your previous life? Yang asked curiously. The current from the fallback of the dark celestial river bombarded downward, and the speed grew faster and faster. Meanwhile, those two giant flowers were also gradually sinking down. As a result, the terrifying force of attraction coming from the huge abyss was becoming stronger and stronger as well. The dark celestial river, and the heavy pressure from the force of attraction, caused the bodies of Qin Mu and the Dragon Chilene to become incomparably heavy. They couldn't maintain their balance and fell into the abyss involuntarily. Dragon Sparrow biting heaven. The green sparrow on Qin Mu's shoulder suddenly cried out, and her primordial spirit appeared to form a dragon sparrow behind her. The head and the tail of the dragon sparrow were connected, and its body was half of a vermilion bird and half of a green dragon. It had the body and tail feathers of a vermilion bird, but the tail of a green dragon also stretched out from the tail feathers. The dragon sparrow spread its wings and circled in the sky. Raising its head to give a sharp cry, the cry of vermilion bird and the roar of a dragon came from its mouth as it spewed out blazing sacred flames. Her tail feathers were inconceivably long and they were nearly connected with her head, forming a loop that surrounded everyone. The vermilion bird sacred flames from her mouth ignited her green dragon tail, and the sacred flames quickly spread throughout her entire body to form a flaming hoop, blocking the terrifying power from ruins of End. Dragon sparrow biting heaven, with the head biting the tail, its body form a loop, and in the center was an independent heaven. A safe heaven was thus formed. It was still Qin Mu's first time, see Yang executing her ultimate art, and it was actually so strong. It actually blocked down the returning flow of the dark celestial river, and the force of attraction. This girl usually caught gods and devils in primordial realm to have a sumptuous meal, but Qin Mu had basically never seen her attack before. This girl was especially fond of serving people, and other than feeding, she also loved to tidy Qin Mu's clothes and smooth the creases. And now that Yang's abilities had burst forth, only then did Qin Mu knew how strong and terrifying she was. She was actually even stronger and fiercer than First Ancestor Human Emperor. One had to know that First Ancestor Human Emperor was in existence on Jade Capital Realm. I wonder how our sister Yang's abilities compared to Sakura Buddha. Qin Mu immediately increased his speed and rushed towards those two giant flowers. He was more curious about the birth of Yang, who was gifted to Celestial Venerable Yu as a maid by South Deity Zhu Q. He thought to himself, to have both the bloodline of the vermilion bird and the green dragon, in that case, what is the relationship between Sister Yang, South Deity Zhu Q, and East Deity Qing Long? He blinked his eyes. This girl that likes to serve people couldn't be the daughter of South Deity Zhu Q and East Deity Qing Long, right? As the daughter of two deities, she should be as precious as a princess. How did she get the habit of serving people? Finally, they rushed through the gap between the petals before the two giant flowers closed completely. Behind them, the petals completely closed and cut off the terrifying force of attraction from the abyss and the pressure from the dark celestial river. However, as the force of attraction and pressure suddenly vanished, Yang couldn't control her body and crashed ruthlessly onto the ground. The small heaven that her primordial spirit surrounded was also destroyed. Qin Mu and the dragon Qilin also crashed down and tumbled on the ground. They crashed into a thick stamen, and got bounced off onto another stamen, which bounced them back again. The stamens were very soft, and even though they had a hard landing, they weren't injured at all. However, being bounced to and fro had still caused them to become rather giddy. Other than that, they were fine. Qin Mu stood up and pulled Yang up. The dragon Qilin also crawled up only to feel the ground to be soft beneath him. He stepped on the ground and saw that the ground here was actually soft as well. This made him click his tongue in wonder. Qin Mu looked around. Compared to the outside world, this place was surprisingly serene and surprisingly vast. The two flowers had formed two worlds that were connected to each other. These two worlds were not small at all, and they were equivalent to the heavens that were in the outside world. However, there were no sun, moon, and stars in the sky. Furthermore, even though it was completely dark in ruins of End, there was actually light here. One of the worlds was pinkish-red in color, while the other world was dark. They had landed in the red-colored world, and the markings on the petals weaved across one another in the sky. The markings were very strange, and those markings flashed continuously with red light. Where the two worlds converged, there were two palaces that should be connected. One of the palaces was red and the other was black. The dragon Qilin looked around his surroundings and said cautiously, "There was a star that dropped down just now, and only then did the undercurrent of the celestial river appeared. What if there was no more star that would fall from today onwards? Wouldn't we be trapped here forever?" Yang glared at him sternly and he lowered his head without another word. He had just seen how powerful Yang was and had decided from then on, he would also maintain absolute respect for this big sister that always fed him. Yang was tidying up Qin Mu's clothes again, and smoothing out the corners of his shirt. Qin Mu was long used to this, and he walked to the end of the horizon to stroke the flower wall of this world in the flower gently. The flower wall was soft to the touch, and felt like the skin of a young girl. The sensation could even be said to be even more exquisite and unique than the skin of a young girl. We are situated in the flower room inside these two flowers. These two flowers are actually real flowers, and not things like divine weapons. Qin Mu had a weird expression, and he said in astonishment, "What kind of flower can withstand such a terrifying force of attraction and destructive force from ruins of end?" Those markings on the flower walls were actually moving gently, and the face of a woman suddenly appeared on the flower wall. The face closed its eye and rubbed its face on his palm, gently, as though it was enjoying very much. Qin Mu was shocked and he hurriedly took back his palm. Celestial Empress. He was sure if he was a cat, his fur would all be standing on ends. The face that appeared on the flower wall was actually Celestial Empress' face. In the coffin of the ghost ship, he had seen the corpse of Celestial Empress before, so he wouldn't be wrong about this face. The face of the flower wall grew further, and chased after his palm to rub its face on his palm. It was very charming and gentle. "Little brother." The face of Celestial Empress gave off shrill laughter. Qin Mu's body tightened and he didn't move. The neck of the maiden that had grown out from the flower wall was very long. There was no body and it looked like a snake bell. "Little brother, it's been so long since anyone has come here." The snake bell coiled around him and numerous scales actually grew out on its neck. The scales brushed past Qin Mu's neck and cuts started to appear on Qin Mu's neck. Fresh blood started to leak out. His corporeal body has long been refined until it was as strong as a god, and yet in front of the scales of this snake bell, his body was as fragile as tofu. It's not just Celestial Empress and her sister that are the ancient gods in ruins of End. His heart trembled violently. There are also other ancient gods born here. Yang, who was on Qin Mu's shoulder, hurriedly flew up and landed on the dragon Chiline's head. She tilted her head and looked curiously at this snake bell that had stretched out from the flower wall. "I have been guarding this place under Big Sister's orders. I've been so lonely for tens of thousands of years." The neck behind Celestial Empress' face coiled around Qin Mu's body, and her face touched Qin Mu's face. She rubbed her face gently against his and giggled. "Sister Celestial Empress always got me to guard our home, and to stay guard here. I've been bored to death. After waiting so long, such a pretty little brother like you have finally come." She stretched out her tongue, and it wasn't the dainty little tongue of a young girl. Instead, it was a forked tongue that was long, soft and very agile. She licked Qin Mu's face and said with a smile, "Is little brother here on Big Sister's orders?" Qin Mu was unfazed and said, "I'm indeed here on Celestial Empress' imperial decree." That face suddenly laid on Qin Mu's chest to listen to his heartbeat. She chuckled and said, "There's no change to the frequency of your heartbeat, and there's also no change to the pressure of the blood flow. If you are lying, you must be a professional in lying." Qin Mu said with a smile, "Big sister, how would I dare to lie?" That snake bell chuckled and said, "Your mouth is rather sweet." Password. Qin Mu's heart sank and the corners of his eyes twitched. The face of the snake bell changed drastically, and she bound Qin Mu tightly. Raising her head high up, she said with a smile, "You are indeed a professional at lying. You had also tricked me. Hee hee. I had wanted to eat you since just now I can finally dig in." Her mouth split open to become wider and wider. Right at this moment, Yang's clear and loud voice rang out with utter bliss. "What a cute and big worm." That green sparrow flapped her wings over and her body became incomparably huge. With a peck at the snake bell's neck, she tugged outward forcefully. Qin Mu almost died from being bound, and he hurriedly transformed into a shadow to break free. Sticking onto the ground, he hurriedly escaped. That snake bell got caught by the neck and gave off a miserable shriek. "Little bird, I'm not a worm." Yang bit onto her neck and moved backward continuously. With a step backward, she moved over a dozen miles back, and the snake bell got pulled longer and longer. More and more of her body was being pulled out from the flower wall. Just as Qin Mu broke free of his shadow state, he saw the green sparrow crossing over his head, and the snake bell was taut from the pull. "Sister Yang, that's not a worm, it's an ancient god." Qin Mu hurriedly shouted, "It's an ancient god from ruins of End." "It's a worm." The green sparrow revealed her true form, and showed her dragon tail, as she transformed into the complete form of a dragon sparrow. Her bird claws transformed into robust dragon claws, which she used to tug backward with force. She planned to pull this big worm out from the flower wall completely to eat, and she shouted, "It's a big worm. This flower has got a worm." Qin Mu and the dragon Qilin felt chills running down their spines. They saw the snake bell being pulled several hundred miles out, and she was still not out completely. That would still be an ancient god worm. Qin Mu shouted in exasperation. Suddenly, in the inside of this world in the flower, those soft stamens started to warp and celestial empress faces started to grow at the tip of these stamens. Every single one of them cried out delicately, "It hurts Sayuro. Little bird, you have hurt me." The inconceivably long stamens warped their bodies like snakes, and they slithered towards the dragon sparrow like lightning. Yang instantly became excited. "This worm has grown so many heads. Furthermore, it is even bigger than what I've imagined. I can eat for a long time." She flapped her wings and was sometimes big, sometimes small. She avoided the attacks from those stamens and would slash with her wings at times to slice off the stamens. Sometimes she would spew out vermilion bird sacred flames from her mouth to burn those stamens, making them giving off delicate cries. Other times, she would control the heavenly lightning to strike here and there. Qin Mu brought the dragon Qilin to hurry to where the two worlds converged and headed straight for that black palace and red palace to avoid the aftermath of the divine arts from these two behemoths. And yet in the sky, Yang was fighting more and more furiously with that snake bell. The power of their divine arts was becoming stronger and stronger, which forced him to keep avoiding. Would Sister Yang be fine? He hurriedly looked back and saw that the abilities executed by the dragon sparrow Yang had transformed into, to have exceeded the field of South Deity's fire and East Deity's lightning. Her divine art had become very unusual. Every time her body shifted, there would actually be a series of mirror images, and there was a total of 13 mirror images. The mirror images possessed the abilities of her true form, and when they attacked those snake bells, she was not at a disadvantage at all. 13 layers of mirror images. Could Celestial Venerable Yu have imparted her abilities to her? Qin Mu was stunned and he suddenly felt slight anticipation. If he could learn Celestial Venerable Yu's ultimate art from Yang, it would be rather fortunate. Yang and that ancient god from ruins of End fought even more fiercely, and this forced him and the dragon Qilin to move further and further away, avoiding the ripples of their divine arts. Finally, they came to where the two worlds converged. Qin Mu walked to the front of the red palace, and the dragon Qilin stretched his head to look inside the palace. Could there be enemies inside as well? Don't jinx it. Qin Mu was furious and kicked him into the palace. The dragon Qilin gave off a miserable scream, and after a long while, his voice was still incomparably loud. Qin Mu was at ease and walked into the palace. He said with a chuckle, "Fatty dragon, you can stop screaming, there's no enemy." He was suddenly stunned as he saw that he had kicked the dragon Qilin onto a crystal coffin. His 4 claws gripped the 4 corners of the coffin, and he was sprawled on the coffin, not daring to move. The dragon Qilin was most afraid of supernatural things, and by kicking him onto a coffin, Qin Mu had scared him out of his wits. He just kept staring at the corpse in the crystal coffin, and screaming non-stop. Qin Mu shook his head and walked forward. After following me for so long, how are you still not used to these strange sights? He looked to the face in the crystal coffin, and his mouth fell agape. His eyes opened wide, and he couldn't continue what he wanted to say. In the crystal coffin laid another celestial empress. However, there was one thing that was different from the celestial empress on the ghost ship. The celestial empress in the coffin had a black mark on the heart of her brows, while the celestial empress on the ghost ship had a red mark on the heart of her brows. Part 351 and 352 end here. Thank you for watching.